Happy Veterans Day to those who've served and to the families for their sacrifice. Don't forget about the Veterans Day Parade downtown Springfield. Looks like the rain is lifting. Hopefully we get no rain for the parade that starts at 10 o'clock downtown Springfield. 11th and Capitol, and then it's going to march towards the state capitol. And also there will be a free meal from the VFW on the north end of Springfield. So check that out, all right? The Veterans of Foreign Wars North Enders hosting that free meal after the parade on this Veterans Day. But let's talk real quick here with State Senator Chapin Rose about how the community-based violence prevention funds that the governor is moving it forward with and that state lawmakers have agreed to some extent, different types of programs here, but do they work? Is this the best route to go when it comes to preventing violence? And what kind of history have we had in the state of Illinois with these types of taxpayer-funded grants to try to stem violence? Senator, when I first started covering the State House, 7-8 years ago, it was at the tail end of the Quinn administration, and there was a lot of talk about the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. And I had to, jump into these audit reports, fresh to covering state government, trying to make sense of what was going on here. But in a nutshell, what kinds of lessons were learned from the NRI program during the Quinn administration? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. And let me also just say a big thank you to all the veterans listening and encourage those of you who are not veterans to make sure you reach out and thank your friends that are. To answer your question, the NRI was a huge, mass taxpayer boondoggle, and basically a lot of funds went out the door and then essentially were unaccountable, or in some cases outright, misused and abused. There are now certain controls in place called the GATA protocol, or the Government Accountability and Transparency Act, which, puts a lot more sunlight on how these funds are spent, a lot more hoops to get your money, et cetera, et cetera. However, I think the big question here is efficacy, right? And I will tell you, first and foremost, we have violent people walking the streets today, multiple convicted felons, continuing to commit all kinds of heinous acts, murder, shootings, et cetera. As you know, Greg, myself and our caucus, Senate Republican caucus, Senator McClure, locally there in your listenership, filed a package of bills designed to take these violent people off our streets immediately, okay? So I can recognize the fact that we're going to need to have the long-term community-based approach in our schools and our churches, but we have an immediate problem of violence. And these individuals need to be off our streets. And so, for example, first offense, 10 years, second offense, life. For many of these heinous gun crimes, violent acts, 10 in life. Let's just do it. Let's get these people off our streets. Then comes the second piece of this, and I think the Democrats have it in reverse order. They've refused to acknowledge the immediate need and have instead proceeded to the more long-term approach, which I admit is necessary, but it's long-term. And now, that said, the efficacy of programs. I will tell you that every county sheriff I have, and I represent 10 counties, has talked to me about mental health problems in their jail, and they have no ability to address, treat, otherwise handle these issues. We issued a bill that would try to get our local county sheriffs some additional help to deal with these mental health issues, okay? If that's where the Democrats are going, that's how Pritzker wants to spend the money, I think he'll find some support. If, on the other hand, it's things like Operation Ceasefire that end up being just some big kumbaya where you bring gun offenders in and sit them down and say, now, why'd you do that? Let me slap you on the wrist and send you back out the door. I don't think it's going to work. I just don't think it's going to work. And so we'll see how he uses the money. We'll see what programs Governor Pritzker funds. I think I've got a pretty good idea based upon, who he is and how he's been acting as governor for the last 3 years, but we'll see. And if he uses it wisely, it will help. If he doesn't, he will be held accountable. And I can promise you, just like what happened in the Quinn administration, all of this eventually catches up. And so if they're going to reward a bunch of their political allies in Chicago with a bunch of walking around money, it will bite them in the rear.
Well, and that's kind of what I wanted to touch on just briefly here was, I mean, the NRI program seemed to have questionable funds go out in the tail end of the Quinn administration, and that seemed to be an election year and these dollars going out and some substantial questions about the efficacy, but also about the transparency and whether or not the money was going out for politics. The current controls we have in place now because of that NRI program, will it curb any potential abuse of those dollars when it comes to possibly, like you said, giving it to people politically connected for walking around money?
Look, I do believe that the GATA Act on the front end has greatly slowed down the pace at which grants are offered and advanced. Okay. And people have to write things like, okay, what are you going to use it for? Shocking, right? Where's it going to go? And then on the back end, they have the accountability of not getting paid until they, prove they've done what they said they were going to do. All that said, this is Chicago politics, and you've got a Chicago governor and a Chicago Democrat majorities in the House and the Senate. And if they're going to go down that path, they are going to be held accountable. But what I will tell you is, and I think the issue is efficacy, and in both the short term and the near term. Okay, Greg, in veto session, they had a choice to call a package of bills that we introduced and we would work with them on to immediately remove the most violent offenders from our streets. They did not do that. Instead, they went with this other stuff. And, is it going to be efficacious? Is it going to be, is there going to be some sort of analysis that says, hey, we're going to put money into this program? Well, the governor's going to have to write those rules. But if it's going to be, this nonsense like, Operation Ceasefire, which, again, I see little value in sticking a couple gun offenders in the room and letting them sing Kumbaya and let them walk back out the door. It just doesn't work that way. Pin in life, get them off the streets. That's where I'm at.
Do you foresee that the dollars will, these tax dollars through grants? Of course, Chicago's very heavily populated, but there are other areas of the state that are experiencing gun crimes, even right here in Springfield, in Decatur, in Peoria, in Rockford, the Metro East.
I think that's an outstanding point. And one of the things that we saw from Pritzker in things like, for example, the big grant during COVID to help small businesses, you saw a complete disparity in where those dollars were awarded, right? And one of the things that concerns me the most about where the governor's going to go with it is, will, downstate urban communities that are experiencing violence be eligible for some of these dollars, or will they pass right over, a Decatur, for example? I'll split the distance between you and me, and between Springfield and Champaign. Will communities like Springfield, Champaign, Decatur, Bloomington be eligible for these funds? Again, the proof will be in the pudding, and we'll see what Governor Pritzker says. But ultimately acts upon as chief executive. But I will tell you, as a member of the Audit Commission, if he's going to wantonly waste the taxpayers' money on programs that are not effective, or like in the case of NRI, where, outright just basically fleeces of the taxpayers, with people walking away with money with no nothing in terms of results, we will be bringing this forward in the Audit Commission. And we're going to be watching him and making sure that the taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Now, the problem, like everything, is once he spends the dollar, if you catch him doing something wrong, how do you get the dollar back, right? But again, you got to go with efficacy, and efficacy in mental health and community-based services has standards that you can study and empirically determine what's effective and what isn't. Or on the other hand, in the short term, programs like 10 in Life that Senator McClure and I would suggest is the way to go to take violent offenders off our streets today and keep them off our streets would be highly efficacious, because they'd be sitting in prison, not walking the streets shooting our fellow citizens.
State Senator Chapin Rose will surely touch base on this again in the future, as I'm sure a lot of scrutiny will be on these dollars as violent crime is impacting communities all across the state. So we'll reach back out and talk soon, all right?
Thanks, buddy. See you later.
You too. It is the WMAY morning news feed now at 8:20, and that means it's a Culver's time check.
$15 per hour is a lot of cheddar. Culver's West on Wabash pays top dollar.